Hi, I'm Gale Banks. From motorsports to military, I build engines. Today we're going to talk about our 6.7 Cummins intake elbow shootout. To understand the importance of intake elbows, we first have to have a discussion about airflow and air density. Increasing intake airflow is all about increasing manifold air density. You do that, and now you can mix additional fuel with it. This is the key to power. So you increase the manifold air density, you mix fuel with it, and you win. Studying airflow isn't something new at Banks Power. It all started in 1954 when my dad asked me to replace the head gasket on my mom's 31 Ford Model A, little four-cylinder L-head engine, made 40 horsepower. By the time I was done, I had replaced the single updraft carburetor with two downdraft racing carburetors. I'd converted the engine to overhead valves on the intake valves. Built my first header and learned an awful lot in the process about the tools a hot rodder uses. But I wanted to know a lot more about what's happening when I now open the butterflies on those two carburetors rather than the smaller single carburetor. I had found I had a higher pressure in the intake manifold at wide open throttle. I'd start thinking about air density inside the manifold, but I really wanted to know about taking the air from the atmosphere outside the engine bay, getting it into the carburetors or later fuel injectors, and how do I go about running the air through piping, and how do I design an intake manifold so it is the most efficient? So all I knew is if I didn't have the air, I couldn't mix the fuel with it. If I didn't have enough air, I couldn't win the drag race down at Lyons Drag Strip in Long Beach. And I wanted to go to the dry lakes in Bonneville at higher altitude. Not much air up there. So I really had to get some mastery of airflow. So what do? You're a kid, you're going to school, they teach you how to do research. That's one of the elemental things. And so around 1956, I started searching for some sort of document, some sort of piece of paper that I could read about this. And I came up with this wartime report from World War II. And this is from the NACA, the predecessor of NASA. These guys were at Langley, Virginia, at the Langley Aeronautical Laboratory, is where this document came from. And it's a report on pressure loss in ducts and elbows. And it really got into, in 1943, something that is absolutely, completely valid all the way through my career. And that is, if you're building an intake manifold and you're making bends in it, or you're building ducting and you're making bends, the use of a round piece of pipe, especially if you're trying to produce a whole lot of airflow through that round piece of pipe, that's not the best way to do it. Now, I have a muffler shop, so to speak. I call it the tube shop. We've been building tubular products, headers, boost tubes, exhaust systems for decades. So you'd think, since that's our art form, we just started using that sort of thing to build things like intake elbows. But there's a better way to do it than round tubular bends. In a round tubular bend, all the air density stacks up around that outside of the bend, and the air sees a smaller cross section. The air is not using all of the cross section in the bend, and the bend has too much restriction. It doesn't flow as good as what was discussed in this 1943 report. So let's get to that. So years ago, we started building what we call NACA elbows. And when I say years ago, I mean 40 or 50 years ago. It's quite a ways back. And when we do this, we don't start with something that's round and kind of manipulate it. We've developed the shape that will give us the best distribution of pressure and flow and the highest pressure out of the piece into the engine. And minimize restriction. If you look at a stock versus what we've done, stock air horn versus monster ram, you can see just the outlet itself is pretty remarkably different. So how do we get to this? Well, we start in CAD, and we know where this needs to be. We know where we want this to be. We know where the hood is at because we've gone in there and digitized the underhood and the engine. So all that's in software. It's all in our computational fluid dynamics test of the model that we build as well. So bottom line, we generate in the computer and then flow in the computer our design. You don't just switch this thing on and it does it for you. You do this for decades, and you do it with a team of people who really have some chops when it comes to this stuff, and that's the team here at Banks Power. Best I've ever seen. Once we've got the design, and once we float it, we go to the 3D printer and we make a model of it, full size, that we can now take out and see if our CFD evaluation of the flow holds up on the flow bench. We go to the flow bench. Do we have a winner? Most times, yes. The guys are really getting good at hitting it the first time. So once on the flow bench, we know we have a winning piece before we ever pour any aluminum whatsoever. And now for the results of the great 6.7 Cummins intake elbow shootout of 2017. Here come the results. We did all our testing on the Superflow SF1020 flow bench. We set the boost pressure, so to speak, or the pressure into each of these elbows at the same value, 10 inches of water, or 3/8 of a pound of pressure pushing the air in. You install the elbow on the bench, you set the pressure, you engage it, and it will bring up the flow until it hits that pressure drop through the elbow. So nobody turns dials to make this happen, it just does it, and you write down what it did. So here are the results. We started with H&S, and H&S does an elbow as everybody else does, with the exception of our monster rams. They do an elbow that clears the stock #1 injector line on the Cummins. To do that, you got to whack the hell out of the inlet part of the thing and really dirty it up and restrict it. So with the H&S, they're pretty much like the stock setup. It's quite flat and kind of chopped off here. It's just blowing into this wall and then pushing it down in. So there's a lot of loss there. The stock elbow flowed 432 CFM. The H&S picked up 110 CFM, or 25% flow increase. The BD, which is a ghost today because I had to give it back to the fellow I got it from, the BD did a bit better. I'm a little disappointed in these guys. They've been around turbocharging quite a while. It picked up 266 CFM, or 62% flow increase. AFE, these guys are kind of green to this kind of stuff. Yeah, they've been around a few years. But it's kind of a marketing thing going on with these cats. They have this Blade Runner thing going on, and the interior of their elbow, if you look deeply inside, has this like blade to help the air turn. Once again, severely chopped and gouged here to get the thing to clear the fuel line. This is a 3.5-inch inlet, and this baby picked up 355 CFM for an 82% gain over the stock piece. Now, one thing I'd like to point out on the H&S, and it's missing a bolt. I really want a bolt there. I don't want to blow that gasket out. We're going to make some really high boost, 50, 100, 150 pounds, maybe more. And shortcutting the manifold off the head and going to something like our Big Hoss side draft, you're going to want to push a lot of air through, whatever you choose. So now we move to GDP. These guys also are missing a bolt, but they put a little pin, but there's no wrenching pressure. There's no bolt pushing this surface against the intake manifold part of the cylinder head. So once again, and this one's got quite a groove in it. I've named this one Scarface. And Scarface, Glacier Diesel, picked up 366 CFM, or an 85% gain. What's really interesting is that this guy, with no Blade Runner stuff going on whatsoever, beat the one with the Blade Runner. So, once again, it's kind of a marketing thing rather than a performance thing. Then we move into this muffler shop elbow. This is Pusher. This has a 3.5-inch inlet. And there's a couple of things about this. First of all, this is the thing you should beat. The NACA study that I did back in 1956, I've been using ever since. I avoid like poison this kind of thing. If you don't beat this, then you're really pretty far off the beam here. This guy really doesn't take advantage of the outlet area you could have. Has quite a gash in it. And one of the things I really picked up about this one is these, I'm going to assume these are water meth injection ports. This first one only blows mainly into one tube. And this one here kind of hits both, but it gets into that divide anyway. And beneath it is the T-map sensor. So after you blow a little water meth, how about it drips on your sensor? I don't think that's going to be good for the sensor. This one picked up 394 CFM, or 91% gain. Then we move into the Monster Ram. The Monster Ram, this is the 3.5-inch. Once again, has a symmetrical outlet on it, as you can see here. And the injection nozzles are kind of canted and aimed. We did this in our CAD so that we got a precise aim of that cone right into the sweet area of this thing. Great water meth evaporation time, cooling time, and then ultimately flow into the cylinder head in a real uniform manner. And we're going almost straight down at that point, as opposed to this guy, which is cheated. In other words, your outlet is like that. So they've kind of cheated the bend rather than using a tighter radius to make it square off at the flange. And oh, by the way, this is not milled flat. It's ground on a disc sander of some kind. If you're going to make big boost, you want a dead flat machine surface. Don't get it there. This is the sort of product, since I'm on it for a second, I could make this thing identical, probably improve it, for about half the money they're selling theirs for. So I showed you the 3.5. The 3.5 picks up 474 CFM or 110% in flow. And then we get to the 4-inch. And both of these take advantage of something we've done so that we didn't have to compromise our design. We've done an injection line that clears the design. And it's made by a major OEM fuel injection supplier. So it's not made out in the back room with a hand bender. So the 4-inch. The 4-inch gets us to 576 CFM gain, 133% more than the stock setup. Some features on the 4-inch and on the 3.5, every mount and every sensor, early or late 6.7, is provided for. You can also put in some other sensors if you want to pick up pressure or temperature for your own instrumentation. I like to do that with my manifold air density equipment. And there you see the injector nozzles installed, ready to go. So, what will these guys set you back? 3.5-inch in natural aluminum is $339, and the injection line to clear it is $60. 4-inch in natural aluminum is $369, and $60 for the injection line. Paint is 24 bucks on either one of them, powder coat. And we have a hump hose. If you're going to run the 4 with a 3.5-inch boost tube, we've got a hose that does that. The 3.5-inch model, any boost tube that'll go to the stock setup will go to this. Where do you go to get it? bankspower.com, and look under air intake and intake elbows specifically. bankspower.com, I'll see you there.